So I'm a professor, as it was mentioned before, and I came of age in the 90s, that as I was going to graduate school in the 90s, and I would like you all to know that I knew what I was getting into. I didn't convert to being a conservative when I got a job like I think Mark did, or at least later on in his career. I knew what I was getting into, hostile territory. And I smiled a lot, and I was friendly, and I shook hands, and I showed pictures of my kids. And that worked for like a long time. And so I was very proud of it. And there was always a conservative agenda for reforming higher ed, just as there's always been a conservative agenda for reforming K-12. And part of what I think national conservatism is like assessing what we have done and figuring out what didn't work, why it didn't work, and what has to change if you want to have decent institutions in your country. And I think we have to honestly evaluate what the policies of conservatism were when it came to higher ed and K-12, and ask ourselves, did they work? Could they possibly have been up to the task? And if the answer to that's no and no, then we have to rethink. And I think Inez's speech is part of that rethinking. But let's just think about what conservatives have been trying to do when it comes to higher ed. I don't blame conservatives. I was one of them. Free speech, ban racial preferences, expose what is going on in the universities, the decline of curriculum in the universities. This was the strategy. Maybe establish new centers. This idea has been around for a while. That would be bastions of liberal arts education on what might otherwise be corrupt institutions. And if you add all those things up, and if you gave us our greatest dream, where free speech is secure on campus, would that prevent the liberal arts from becoming corrupt? If you banned racial preferences, that just changes who's on the college. Does it affect the disciplines? Just exposing, that's kind of what bragging is for the left. You expose how the disciplines have been taken over by corrupt ideologies, and there's no longer traditional education on universities. You can expose that. That's an accomplishment from their perspective. You're validating their victory. So a lot of the things that we've been trying to do, even if we did it successfully and as best as we could, it wouldn't have changed the direction of higher ed. We could maybe hope that it was some sort of temporary madness, that eventually they'd come to their senses and recognize the beauties of our civilization and start endorsing it. Well, a temporary madness doesn't last 70 years. Well, I mean, it could. That would be just one person, though, but it's like a class of people. So as I say, I don't blame conservatives. I would have done what they did in their circumstance, but I'm not going to keep doing what they did in our circumstance when the failures and limits of the policies that we've been advocating for so long have been exposed as inadequate to the task. Okay? And I think that's, maybe that's a principle that, a lot of people in this room agree with. Things are worse than I was expecting. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought just being charming and professional would be enough for me. And it turns out that I'm not that charming and I'm not that professional. But I think even if I were, it wouldn't have worked. So what's the failure? And I think part of it is just an intellectual failure. A failure to recognize that we are up against a progressive system of education that has lots of blocks in it, and that we've been operating from within that system and trying to fix it. There's a great book that a person in this room exposed to me, Frederick Rudolph. It's called Curriculum. It was written by the Carnegie Foundation in the early 70s. It's a history of curriculum in American higher education from 1637 to 1972. And sounds kind of interesting. It really is interesting. And it's a triumphal book, because we won is the story of the progressive university that Frederick Rudolph tells in this book. We won. We have destroyed the old liberal arts education. We've gotten rid of Latin and Greek. We've gotten rid of Western Civ anywhere. We've established Ad-9 general education courses, which we can continue to thin out. We've taken over disciplines through associations. We have accreditation under control. So we can dictate what universities are going to look like. And when the federal government doesn't like what universities do, we can squeeze them with a student loan program. It's a system we're up against. And like taking this system and saying, oh, and we'd like some free speech with that, isn't going to change the system from producing a new thing. And what's so interesting about this system is that it's not just a higher ed system. It affects K through 12. Because how do you get into the system? Well, you have to have the properly approved units in high school. So and parents want their kids to go to college. So you can get school choice in K through 12, but all the parents will be saying, and will my kids be able to go to the higher ed system when they're done? So the schools will be standardized in K through 12, just like they become standardized in higher ed. It's a standard system. We're up against that system. And even schools that kind of seem like they're on their outside are in it. They have departments that are based on disciplines, that are all staffed by PhDs. Like, that's all very recent. The university has been around since the 1400s. In America, they've been around since the 1600s. Only in the 20th century did we say, no, we need PhDs. Only in the 20th century, like kind of later on, accreditation, did we say, in order for you to operate as a college, you're going to have to like drop your denominational affiliation, or at least loosen it. Hire people from prestigious places and try to get them to be good Mormon teachers, or good Jewish teachers, or good Christian or Catholic teachers. We depend on the credentialing system to continue on it, even at Hillsdale. Is this making sense to everyone? So we're up against a system. And the only way to really reform a system is to go after the building blocks. And Inez is really going after the building blocks. I think she says, get the building blocks and then make them into dust and then put salt on top of them. And I'm going to kind of speak against that view, because we do have to ask ourselves the question, can we do without higher education institutions in the modern world and be a powerful country, be a patriotic country, have people who are competent to do all the things that a modern economy are going to do? And if we need higher education institutions in some form, then we have to think about salting the earth and then restoring something at the end of the day. So my motto on this is destroy and restore at the same time. Another failure, I think, of conservative higher ed stuff is, and by that I mean all the ed stuff, because higher ed affects everything below it, is a lack of clarity about what the purpose or purposes of higher ed institutions. I've been working down in Florida, and one of the first things I did when I was down, before I went down to Florida is I looked for conservative blueprints for what a university should look like. Do you think we have one? Like, if we don't have a blueprint on what a university should look like, what the purposes are, how can we expect to compete? So let's talk about the purposes of what universities are. I think we want to get several things out of them. We do want liberal arts education as a bastion or conservator of our civilizational heritage. Totally need that. We do need modern research departments that make contributions to physics, that make contributions in chemistry and biology, that form the kind of basis for some modern economic innovations and research. So we have to have liberal arts. We have to have the research, component. We should be having workforce education that prepares people for jobs. And those things are all, I think, non-negotiable. And we need to have professional schools. We need medical schools. Like before the progressive university, like I'm speaking against it, but before it, there was no medical standards. People just called themselves a medical school. And maybe that's okay. Like I'm open to everything really on these matters, but maybe not. And so we want specialized professional things like the law school, theology, and medicine are the old three. There are probably others we want to add on top of that now. And so we need to get these things out of it, all right? So we have this progressive system, all of which aims to achieve some of these three things, or these 3 or 4 things. Like, it is trying to accomplish those things, but it is very subject to capture, and it has been captured, though it still has healthy elements within it. And then we have so we have the progressives trying to achieve these goals. And I think we should, they have other goals too, and that might be part of the problem. So I think we, as people who are interested in reforming higher ed, need to recognize what the end goals that we're after. It's not productive to simply destroy if these goals can't be achieved through some other institution. So takeover, being serious about taking assets from the left on this, I think is very important and we should do it, but always with an aim toward rebuilding, restaffing. We should be asking ourselves fundamental questions. Does this discipline X, say sociology, belong on the modern university? Or if it has been so ideologically captured, should we be getting rid of it, never funding it? We should be asking those questions. Do we need PhDs to be teaching this discipline? Is that the adequate certification? I was looking up last year, you know how many PhDs are produced every year in the United States? It's 750,000. Isn't the First Lady some sort of PhD? I'm sorry, ED, I always think of the other ED. So I don't think she thinks about or worries about that anymore. But in any event, so she has an ED, she has an ED. And what was I saying here? I'm sorry. Anyways, I'm blushing, but the lights show that, so you know that. All right, so we should be revisiting fundamental questions. And think about it. All conservative approaches to higher education have been assuming these answers. Keep the discipline. Require PhDs. Require accreditation. Keep the student loan in place, but put conditions on it. Everything is assuming the progressive infrastructure. We have never gone back and said, was it a mistake? And I think that's what first principles thinking in this particular case demands, a look back at was it a mistake? And I think we could prove in some ways that it was a mistake. Not to go back to Jill Biden's degree, but we have not yet begun to expose things in higher ed. Thank goodness for Chris Rufo and Libs of TikTok for showing some of the corruption in higher ed, but there is so much left to do. I have dreams of how we could do this. Wouldn't it be great to sit down with the history faculty at any Southeast Louisiana State College and ask them basic questions of American history, like Senator Kennedy does with all those judges. What's in Article 3? I'm unfamiliar with Article 3, Senator. Let's ask history professors. Well, what happened in 1776? Can you say the words of the Declaration of Independence? Name 3 founding fathers. It would be fantastic. Ask sociology professors, what has your profession taught us? Line them up, get them on camera, and let's just show, Michael, whatever his name, Michael Walsh did, What is a Woman? What is sociology? And what has it taught us? Let's show that it is a hollow, ideologically captured discipline. Another one, English. Name a character from Jane Austen. Give me the plot of the Odyssey. Is it about a trip? We could show that these universities and certain disciplines have been so hollowed out that there is no basic knowledge. Was that 15 minutes? Oh, my thing went off. All right. in conclusion, I'll flip it over. I mean, I want to make two suggestions, but like I do think we have to be, so that we should be exposing, we should be interested, however, in building smaller institutions, not these big prisons that the modern university and the K-12 system is, smaller specialized schools that are actually connected to aligned K-12 schools. They should be specializing in things like workforce or research, and we should just getting pipelines from K-12 to universities. When there are 50,000 people, those universities have a monopoly on the souls and futures of our students. We need to be building alternatives to those, and most importantly, and this is a way of segueing to Mark's talk, trying to take over the ones that exist. Our kids are going to go to college. We have to build better ones. Thank you.